It's my own fault, really. It's a tough transition when you're full of waffles and looking down at your Mardi Gras beads to go to Transfiguration Sunday. But I have no one to blame but myself. I was a big part of doing this. But I don't hesitate because I know that this gospel we are about to hear is the kind of news that is far better than anything else that we might hear. And so it's good to have you with us. In fact, if we had the opportunity even to be in New Orleans this weekend, I know there would be a pretty good chance we would be able to crash a party or grab a few more beads. Because it's that time of year for a lot of people when you celebrate and when you say, "Laisse les bon temps rouler," that wonderful French Cajun phrase. And for me, the little connection, it's just a small one, but the little connection from all of the celebrations that are going on right before the beginning of Lent and our service today and today's gospel is that if we also had the opportunity to be on that mountaintop with Jesus, we had the opportunity to experience some of the things that are described in our gospel for today, I wouldn't be surprised if some of us might be thinking to ourselves, "Laisse les bon temps rouler," because it doesn't get any better than this. So let's just stay. Let's let the good times roll. And you can understand why they would feel this way because, oh my gosh, the heroes of our faith. During that time with Jesus, they got to see Moses, they got to see Elijah, they got to see our Lord transfigured before them. And not only that, they had the opportunity to hear the voice of God Himself, encouraging them and their faith, and giving them some wisdom by telling them, not only is this my beloved Son, but you need to listen. Listen to Him. And so in the hope of somehow extending this time, or at least hanging on to this moment for as long as possible, what does Peter say? The only thing that comes to his mind, "Lord, let's just stay. Why don't we stay here? In fact, I'll even build us a place. I'll build a booth for you and one for Moses and Elijah too." And who could blame him? After all, they had, when you think about it, they had just been given a glimpse of heaven. They had just seen a little bit of heaven. And as some of you may remember, they are not the only ones that God has done this for, right? You probably know some of the stories. How, like in the book of Genesis, there is that fascinating account about how God gave these sets of dreams to Joseph, and how it was for a purpose, it was for a reason. Those dreams ended up saving not only his family and the brothers who betrayed him, but countless others who would have starved to death. And then, just by coincidence, a few weeks from now, when we get to the end of this Lenten season coming up, on the last Sunday in Lent, the Old Testament reading is going to be the one from Ezekiel chapter 37. This is the story that tells us of how the Spirit of the Lord takes Ezekiel to this valley that's filled with dry bones. Remember that? And when he is there, surrounded by death, God gives him this vision of how the people of Israel would one day be restored. Or as we sang just a few minutes ago, how one day He will raise you up. But there is not necessarily some bad news in all this. When you ask yourself why these sort of things sometimes happen, and they do indeed, not just in the Bible, but to all of us, it reveals to us and reminds us of the darker side of life, the harsher side to life. You see, one of the reasons why God lifts this veil that separates heaven and earth, is because he knows that there's going to be times in your life, there's going to be times in your journey when these sort of experiences can help to provide you with the kind of hope and comfort and strength that you're going to need. For instance, in this situation, right after Jesus leads them back down the mountain, Peter and James and John run smack dab into a father who's desperate, who's out of his mind with worry. He approaches Jesus and he kneels before him and he says, "Lord, please, please, Lord, have mercy upon our son. He's having seizures and we don't know what to do, and he is suffering greatly." In other words, no sooner had they just come down from one of the most amazing experiences of their life that now they find themselves right back into the kind of pain and suffering that is such a big part of life. A lot of you here, you know what I'm talking about. This doesn't need to be a long part of the sermon. A lot of you here have experienced the kind of worry that comes when your child is sick. A lot of you here knows the kind of pain and grief and heartache that comes when a good friend or a family member has died way too soon. You know these things. And in our gospel for today, what Jesus also wants you to know is that when those times come, that he is with you. And that there's going to be a lot more to their story, and to ours as well. Let me give you an example of what I mean. There's only been a couple of times in my life that this has happened. One of them was just this week. I guess it's a coincidence. I never know what's a coincidence and when it's God. I mean, I just gave up trying to decide or name it. I just will share it. But just this week, I was having an incredibly detailed dream, and that alone is kind of significant because I never remember my dreams. And in the middle of that dream, it wasn't a part of the dream. That's the crazy thing. It wasn't a part of the dream, but in the middle of the dream, Al Kennedy, a man named Al Kennedy, appears. And in the midst of this dream or vision or whatever it was, the man whose support and friendship meant the world to me during my first few years here at Shepherd of Life was just standing right there in front of me. Now, even in this dream, I'm thinking, as you sometimes do, you're half dreaming, half aware you're dreaming. I know that I officiated at his funeral about 7 years ago. But he was standing there just as clear as day. And he was wearing, and I couldn't even tell you what you wore today. I don't pay attention to that. But he was wearing this brown bomber jacket, and it had a very lived-in, comfortable look about it. And the other thing that I remember vividly is that he was looking at me with this kind of bemused smile. And I recognized it instantly because it is the very same smile he would often give me after sinking an incredibly long putt. It happened again and again. And he'd just sort of look at me and smile. Wouldn't brag, it's just like, pretty impressive, huh? Pretty amazing, huh? Pretty remarkable. But you don't see that kind of thing very often, huh? It was that kind of smile. And I had seen it before. And honestly, I was just so stunned and so surprised to see him that I immediately grabbed him. I grabbed him and I hugged him and I held on to him as if my life depended on it. And out of the blue, because I never did this with him when he was with us, I just started sobbing. And I woke myself up, like wide awake now. And because it was so real, Ruth asked me if I was okay, and as I tried to tell her what had just happened, I started choking up and crying for a few more minutes. It was very unnerving in a way. So I want to take a moment here. This is a sidebar. Earlier this week, we had a Bible study lunch on mysticism. I did this class, crash course on mysticism, and we talked about people like Hildegard of Bingen and Julian of Norwich, and these mystics throughout the centuries who have had visions and wrote about it in ways that really maybe perhaps pulled back that veil just a bit. It certainly did for them. And their writings have touched a lot of people. So if in the midst of that class, one of them were to say to me, and the reason why I want to take this sidebar for just a minute is because I'm very aware of how language has a lot of power. And sometimes I get concerned that if I share this story with you in a certain way, that you might shut down and therefore not be open to some of the mysterious and unexplainable ways that God reveals himself to you. And I don't want that to happen. So in an effort to be very cautious with my language, if someone said, "So are you saying, John, that God sent Al Kennedy to appear to you in your dreams?" I would say, I probably wouldn't be that bold. This is what I would say. I would say, you know what? Al Kennedy was a remarkable man, and he strengthened my faith, and he was an inspiration to me, and he was a blessing. And I believe when I look at my life, those kind of people are from God, and that all of my blessings are from God. And so, yeah, I do believe there is a connection between how God has worked in my life and Al Kennedy's part of it. And the remarkable thing for me is that it didn't stop, obviously, I guess, at his death 7 years ago. That his life and his faith is still strengthening me and nurturing my faith. So yeah, I'm comfortable saying it that way. And I tell you what else it did. It brought back a lot of memories for me. And some of you who've been in this church a long time probably remember Al Wells. And if you didn't, it's fine. I put his picture on the back of the bulletin because I've been thinking about him all week. I remember how he joined the Navy right after he graduated from high school. He was so young, but the year was 1939. And so he joined the Navy. I remember how he had been assigned to the USS Houston, and in 1942, that ship was sunk by the Japanese. It was awful. They were surrounded by lots of ships. They were cornered. They had no way out. Some of the men managed to survive the ship going down, but many of them were shot in the water and didn't even make it to shore. Those that did were, well, they were POWs. And many of them were forced to work on helping to build a railroad. It became known as the Death Railway because of the thousands of people who died while they were building it. Then I remember this other conversation with him. The year was 1996. A group of us from Shepherd of Life went to Europe, and one of the things that we were planning to do was to see some of the sites and locations connected with the life of Martin Luther and the Reformation. But on that trip, we also wanted to visit a concentration camp, and so we spent a big part of the day in Dachau. And afterwards, we were having a kind of a worship service, but it was also a chance to just sort of debrief and share, a chance to give people an opportunity to process what they had seen and what they were feeling. And we knew, before we even walked in, that this was going to hit close to home for Al. He was a Japanese POW, not a German one, but he spent 3 years as a POW. They weren't liberated until like September 1945. And we knew that was probably going to stir up some memories for him. And one of the people in the group asked him, "How is it, Al, that you were able to survive when so many didn't?" And I will never, ever forget what he said. Because he told us, and you could tell this came from the heart, and he almost never talked about it. He said in almost every single case, what seemed clear not just to me, but to everyone, that the men who didn't make it were the ones who, somewhere along the way, and it was not said with judgment, but that somewhere along the way, they had lost their hope. They lost their hope. Today's gospel is so important because God doesn't want any of us to lose our hope. He doesn't want us to lose the hope that was made possible for us because of Jesus. And according to the Bible, and we're about to move into Lent, so it's a nice setup for us and a good way to get ready. You see, according to the Bible, when Jesus died on the cross, it was something called the temple curtain that was literally torn in two. Now, we know from historians that this was a part of their worship life, that there was this curtain that they had set up to separate the people of God from the Holy of Holies. But then we're told in the Gospel of Matthew, it's in chapter 27, that when Jesus died, that was the moment when this curtain was torn in two from top to bottom. It was that moment when the earth shook, when rocks split, when the tombs broke open. And it was then that all of those who had died were raised to life. Matthew also says that even the centurion who had been given the assignment to guard Jesus, how even he looked at all of this and said, this certainly was the Son of God. I hope every time we gather together for worship, we give you a moment or two to think about your life. Think about the big picture for you. Whether you're looking backward or ahead or what's going on right now. But this morning, as you do that, as you think about your own life, I hope you'll also maybe be able to think about some of the ways that God has revealed the power of his love to you. Because we believe that. First of all, we believe that his love is incredibly powerful and strong and eternal. And we do believe that God is always looking for ways to show you that, to reveal this to you. And as you think about some of the ways that he's nurtured your faith and strengthened your faith, and maybe none of us have the faith we wish for, but if you have any at all, believe me, that comes from God himself. He has given you that gift. And I think when I listen to people talk about their faith and some of their spiritual high points in their life, sometimes it may indeed happen on a mountaintop when they're completely surrounded by the beauty and the glory of God's creation. Sometimes, though, it's very much a part of their regular life. For some people, it can happen right here, kneeling at this altar, when they're surrounded by something else, when they're surrounded by the faith of their brothers and sisters in Christ. So for each of you, I believe it happens at different times and in different ways, but there is one miracle that we all share in common, and it's this: that we all have a God. We have a God who wants you more than anything else, who wants you to see, and he wants you to hear, and he wants you to know in your heart that because of his Son, because of Jesus, this veil that once separated people, that once separated all of us from the joy and the beauty and the power and the wonder of God's love, has been removed forever. Which is why I am proud to say, although I may not be always able to articulate it for you, I'll always be open. I will always try my best to stay open to these glimpses of heaven that I believe God gives to each of us, and I pray that we will too. Because he has placed within you and within each of us the kind of faith that has the power to shine. And I mean shine, to shine so dazzling bright that it can give hope to others. And not not just during the darkest of times, and not just during this life.